Welcome to this bonus episode of Cyclops is Waiting for Me, an X-Men animated recap podcast with Pride of the X-Men. I'm JC. I had the best fucking New Year's ever. I really don't know that because this episode was actually recorded in 2023. But we're here, and at long last, after hearing people ask me for 2 years, have you guys watched Pride of the X-Men yet? I finally did.
And I'm past Rod. And I'm assuming as long as no one bothered me for 1 week, I had a great fucking Christmas and New Year's.
I love that you're going to be so much more relaxed on the day where this finally publishes than the day when we recorded it.
Yeah, actually, well, see, this is coming out January 8th. I might be stressed by now again.
I'll make sure you are. Okay. I will even out the energy.
So this is what happens every year. I push all my meetings or anything anybody wants to schedule for like that last week of the year. And I'm like, January 2nd, let's get back together January 2nd. Every year, January 2nd comes by, I'm like, fuck you, past Rod. Like, I have 30 meetings today.
I actually have January 2nd off because of the way the holidays fall. So I don't go back to work until the 3rd. So people are like, oh, should we grab drinks when you're back in the office? I was like, if you want to grab drinks on the Wednesday.
Yeah, that's funny. So I'm freelance for anybody that doesn't know. So another version of me is my own boss. So I'm always just yelling at another time frame of me. So I'm like, damn it, Rod, why'd you schedule it that way? We'll see. Either way, that last week should be pretty great. Cyclops is Waiting for Me is our weekly podcast series where we're going back and watching every single X-Men animated episode we can find. Our first series started with the original 1992 X-Men, the animated series, building up to the release of X-Men 97, which we thought was coming out last year, but since it's not here yet, allegedly, once again, this is weeks early, we don't know. Maybe a Christmas surprise? I don't know. We needed to find some other shows to cover.
Imagine if they did the Christmas surprise during What If they also dropped 97.
That would be hilarious. Yeah, like Uatu.
That would be so fucked.
Uatu's like, and he opens the door and it's like,
it's literally the scene from Deadpool. Oh, I hate it.
So we're covering other shows. Like this long-awaited bonus episode, I was so excited for you to see this. I saw your text later because I passed out when you were texting me, but like,
what was the exact text, Rod? It needs to be read by you because I want to hear how you read it through.
About halfway through, it's not bad, but Jesus, tap dancing Christ that Wolverine to VO. I think my mind filtered out the tap dancing part before this funnier now. Yeah, so I was telling John, I didn't even take notes on this one because I watched it twice now, earlier today and then right before we were recording. But as a kid, for years, me and my brother, we had no other X-Men thing other than this VHS cassette. My parents still have it, to their credit, in their basement. My mother gave away everything my brother and I ever cherished in our childhood, except for a few VHS cassettes. And I think that was just by accident because there's a bunch of VHS in there that we are not sentimentally attached to as well. But me and Peter, I want to say we wore it out, but it's still the original one. We just watched it a lot. So this special pilot, whatever you want to call it, is like ingrained in my head.
We need to get you one of those acrylic cases to put it in, just to keep it safe and not it's already been hit by the ravages of time, but we need something for like, make it a display piece. I feel like for you.
I actually haven't even watched it again, like the tape again, to see if there's even still a show on it.
It's not. Let's literally seal this fucker up and we go from there. Some quick reminders. We are a recap show about an animated pilot that aired almost 35 years ago. There are gonna be spoilers. If you don't want it spoiled for you, pause the podcast, go to an associated website to Google that shows video that has the full episode since it's not on Disney, and then come back. And if you haven't guessed based on what I just said, we're not affiliated with Marvel Animation, Disney, or Disney Plus in any way.
And don't forget to follow us on social media at Cyclops IWFM Pod on Instagram, TikTok, Threads, X, or whatever it's called this year, and Facebook.
Hopefully it's dead by now. Hopefully that my Christmas wish came through.
That's what you ask Santa for?
Every year.
And of course, make sure to follow us on all your favorite podcast services.
Especially Castbox.
Castbox. It might be X now too, right? Because it's supposed to be everything. Watch it be the Bizarro-verse where everything goes right with that platform.
If he buys Castbox, I'm removing our podcast from Castbox.
It's not a principle.
Yeah. Today, we're going to be talking about the original X-Men animated pilot titled Pride of the X-Men. It aired in 1989. I could not find a date for it on NBC, and it sits at a 6.6 star rating on IMDb. I feel like we need to have a quick conversation around the show before we get into the actual recap of the episode.
I don't actually know if I first saw it as an airing or if it was a VHS. And if I did see it aired on TV, I don't even know if it was the original one or you know how stuff just would replay all the time back then?
It was absolutely in syndication, but could not find for the life of me IMDb, any of the wikis, actual Wikipedia. I would love to know what the actual date this thing originally aired on, if somebody could give us definitive proof. It kind of feels like the launch date of the Nintendo Entertainment System in the United States is unclear. Like, do you actually have a hard time finding confirmation of launch date of that because of how records were kept in the 80s?
I wonder, too, if because X-Men wasn't the force that we know it as now, maybe it depended on your region. Like, since it was in syndication, does it mean, like, maybe it played for you earlier in the year or me later? Or, like, whenever a network had, like, depending on how seriously they took it, like, whenever they had, like, an open slot? Because I don't... Would this be a Saturday morning thing, I guess?
I believe it was tied to that Saturday morning block of Marvel cartoons that were around at the time and just got inserted in there. But I also remember, like, you know, growing up in the Northeast, there were certain Saturday morning shows on, like, what would become the WB11 that would get preempted by basketball and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And as a kid who did not and still does not care about sports, I would just miss my show. And then there was never a repeat because, it's episode that should have happened the next week. And it's like, well, I guess I'll just go fuck myself then.
I don't even remember what it was called, and it probably wasn't that important, but I remember there was this one, like some celebrity, I can't remember her name, back then had like an animated one episode like special or whatever, and I so bad wanted to see it, but something, I don't even know if what I did was actually bad or if I was just being a kid, but my dad was punishing me for whatever reason, and he was like, you can't watch that show, that's your punishment. And
what did you do?
it could have been anything. I could have actually done something wrong, or I could have just annoyed my dad. Who knows? You know, I was like really little. But back then, I mean, his whole thing was like, it'll be on again. It was never on again. And
was it the Carol Burnett show animated?
Right. No, it wasn't Carol Burnett. It was Lily Tomlin? I think maybe it was her. I don't know.
So here's the only thing that makes that amazing. I cannot picture like a sub 10-year-old Rod caring about watching Lily Tomlin. So that makes that story great, even if it's totally false.
So this was the era where every IP and celebrity had like an animated show. Like Roseanne Barr had an animated show, Little Rosie.
Louis Anderson had a great show. Howie Mandel had Bobby's World, which I still know. I never actually understood why it was that, but yeah.
That show was always funny in our household because Bobby's mom, I don't know if she's based on a real woman or whatever, but she had that really thick Minnesota accent. So she's like, don't you know, Bobby? And then Uncle Ted, who I think was Uncle Ted Howie? I don't know. Hey, Uncle Ted would always call Bobby Bobo. Hey, Bobo. And Bobo in Korean is like calling someone an idiot. So my parents always thought it was hilarious that the uncle was just calling Bobby an idiot the whole time because that's what they called me. They're like,
I was waiting for you to be like, it was a slur.
Yeah, not quite. Now, what my parents called me was kind of that's all the story.
To be clear, they are the ethnicity of the word that they're saying, so it is a different scenario.
It wasn't a racial slur. It was just like my mom was calling me the Korean equivalent, like a dickhead or something. But when I was like 5. So now,
so it's like when your Italian uncle calls you a fucking idiot.
Yeah, so whatever show this was, it never came on again. But then like what happens in after school specials happened, where all my friends were talking about it, and I had no clue what they were talking about. I remember going to school the next week. I think Jason Vogel, if you're out there listening, because I know you listen to this sometimes, you were one of them. And this is not your fault, but you're like,
way to go, Jason, you fucking dick.
When they in the show, when they had the thing and the real piece of cake or whatever, I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And everyone was so excited about this special and talking about it, and me and my brother had no idea what they were talking about. And my dad kept saying like, yeah, well, you'll just catch it next time it went on. I think that it objectively was just not that good because they didn't put it back on again. But for kids, it doesn't matter. Like, if it was entertaining, it was entertaining. But it never aired again. I can't find any trace of it. I probably wouldn't even care about it now. I probably watch it now and be like, that's just boring. But it was just funny, like, at the time. Like, I wanted to see it, and then the next day at school, everyone was talking about it, and I had no idea. But that was the era. This show, however, I do remember, whether we saw it, like, live aired or aired on TV or not, I remember the VHS being, like, a sacred object for me and my brother at our house. We'd watch it all the time. I even messaged you when we decided to do this. I found my version that I watched, and they included everything off that VHS. I forgot about the first commercial with all the video games, but that tracks because those were the games out. I was impressed though they included CG. So I don't know if that...
It was early CG Spider-Man in there. And if you search on the Google-owned site that has it, if you find the one that's an HD upres, that has that on there.
88. It is wild for me to think of that. You know, granted, it's not great, but it's better than what I pictured for 1988 CG.
It was very Lawnmower Man vibes to me.
So I'm like, was this maybe a few years later, like a re-release of the VHS that included this? I don't know, because it did talk about like Super NES games and stuff.
Well, here's the thing: it could not have been 89 when it originally came out because it had Spider-Man 2 for the Game Boy.
Oh, okay.
Spider-Man on the Game Boy was not a launch title, and the Game Boy came out in 89, so it had to be a second version of the VHS.
So I wouldn't be surprised if it was like something like as a precursor to like 92 coming out or something, right? Just to kind of get things. I don't know. I don't actually know when that happened. And I don't know if we actually owned it in 89 or what, or if it was just early 90s, but we watched it all the time. I do remember the second commercial with Spider-Man asking everyone to register to vote, which I specifically remember because it was one of the few times we saw a live action Spider-Man that actually looked pretty good. But also me being like, what, at that time I was like 10 or something. I'm like, I need a vote.
Yes, you do.
I guess they're expecting a good amount of 18 plus viewers then on that VHS.
So The Amazing Spider-Man 2 for Game Boy came out in 1992.
Okay, so this probably was a release to like maybe promote or drum up interest in X-Men 92 then.
Or Marvel was fucking broke and needed to get as much money as they could, which was the theme for parts of the 90s. So
you know, that actually now makes a little bit more sense too. So we couldn't have had this tape for those number of years, so we probably taped it off TV. So I probably watched the aired one a lot more until we got this actual tape, and then that's probably why we own it, is we begged them for it once that came out proper and we didn't have to like skip commercials and stuff.
So some other high-level important aspects about this. We've alluded to this on previous episodes, but let's, for the sake of saying it, in the Pride of the X-Men episode, the budget for this was unlocked by Margaret Lesh. We've talked about Margaret before. Eric and Julia Leewald for the X-Men 92 show. I've never heard them sing the praises of somebody else as much as Margaret, because she was the one who led to 92 getting approved. She unlocked the budget for this pilot, which was originally supposed to go to Toei for the 13th episode of the RoboCop cartoon.
Oh.
So the reason why, if you were one of the RoboCop cartoon fans, that you didn't get a 13th episode, it was because of this.
I think that was worth it.
And I'll acknowledge this. Secret Galaxy, which used to be called Toy Galaxy, they actually posted the video about this episode like 3 days ago. And in a normal circumstance, if I had watched it before, I would use his work for reference. But I didn't want to bias my opinions of our review and walkthrough by watching his. So I'm sure Dan Larson over there has some interesting stuff as well, which at this point would have been about a month prior when this goes live.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because you brought up the idea of actually doing this for the first episode of this year, and then I was like, yeah, that sounds great. I love the show. And then I saw the thumbnail come up, and I didn't watch it for the same reason, because I was like, I kind of want to like have my own thoughts about it. But I guess is it an anniversary or something? Is there a reason that like everybody's? I guess 97's coming out, so everybody's kind of...
I think it's the 97 tie, honestly. Some other important stuff. It is not confirmed, but it is speculated that this is in the same animated universe as Fantastic Four, which came out in 78. That was the one where they replaced Johnny Storm with the robot so kids didn't light themselves on fire. Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which has Kitty in the show in one of the episodes as Sprite, which is one of her aliases we've talked about in the past for Kitty. But that would mean that this happened in continuity earlier. You also had the same voice actor who does Wolverine in that episode as well.
I think I do remember that, because I had another VHS that had Spider-Man and Amazing Friends. It might have been the first episode, because it was when he met Firestar and Iceman.
Right. Yeah, there's 3 episodes which now go into our backlog of bonus episodes that directly involve the X-Men, with 2 origin episodes and then one that's just like the X-Men team. So yeah. And let's see, is there anything else in general before we get into this? One, we mentioned it's not on Disney Plus. The only dub that exists is in Italian.
Interesting.
The multiverse number for the super nerds that are out there, this is Multiverse Earth 652975. Means absolutely nothing. Just sharing it because it's a thing we found. And at the end of the day, Margaret Lausch pushed for it to be reworked into what would become X-Men 92 with the Leewolds, because this was just okay in her perspective, and they needed it to be something great, which would lead to her later saying, I'm going to put my job on the line. If we don't kill it in ratings, I'm out.
And it's something, the panel that I got to attend over at LA Comic-Con, and I forgot to say this last episode, but the reason JC couldn't be there was because he had his own panel at the same time.
Yeah, I would not have intentionally missed that, but I was literally running a panel concurrently at LA Comic-Con.
They all, once again, praised Margaret Lesh for, green lighting everything that they were doing, but also said that the experiences of making Pride, well, Larry Houston specifically said that his experience of making Pride of the X-Men led to him knowing his demands for the next show, which we will get into a few things that we've already started talking about.
And then the last thing before we get into the actual episode itself, I just want to point out, did you look up the voice acting cast of this show?
No, I remember it wasn't like Rob Paulson in this or something.
Of all the people you could have named, Rob is not on the list.
Okay.
I literally have who I think you're referring to as the last one listed.
Okay,
so
go for it.
Here, I basically went through, and anybody who had something that was recognizable to me, whether it was personal nerddom or iconic to the voice actor. Cyclops was by Michael Bell. Michael was Duke in G.I. Joe.
Oh, okay. That tracks because it's similar, like, animation.
Ron Gans, who was the Juggernaut, this is my personal one, was Nikolai Volkov from the Hulk Hogan Rock and Wrestling show.
I remember that show, but I don't know that actor.
Nikolai Volkov was the wrestler who was all about being Russian, basically.
Okay.
Alan Oppenheimer, best known as Skeletor, was Blob.
That's hilarious.
Neil Ross, who was Nightcrawler in the Spider-Man 1994 cartoon, was the Green Goblin.
Oh, okay.
We have Kath Soucie, sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name incorrectly, who was Kitty, was Phil and Lil from the Rugrats.
Oh, wow, okay.
You have Earl Bolin, who is Magneto, who is one of the few who've crossed over into IRL success, was the Doctor in the Terminator movies, the first three.
That's so funny, okay.
Pat Farley, who is Pyro, was Krang in the Ninja Turtles cartoon, the original.
Okay.
You have Dan Gilveza, who is Colossus, also was Goldbug in the Transformers cartoons, and Spider-Man in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Oh, wow, okay.
John Stevenson, who is Professor X, was Thundercracker in Transformers. And a lot of that is like that small group. He was one of the... Why am I blanking? Oh, my God. Thundercracker was one of not Soundwave. Oh, my God. The annoying jet from Transformers.
Starscream?
Starscream. He's one of Starscream's boys.
Okay.
And then the finale, literally, and I'm stealing this point blank from Secret Galaxy, Frank Megatron Welker was Toad.
What an odd role for that. Okay.
And he also, and this was one of the facts that we found, he also was Iceman in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Okay, that's funny. Actually, it's funny, too, because I thought, now rewatching this, is like, Toad is the funniest person in the show.
I mean, he literally is like, he's Igor from the fucking classic Frankenstein
But he's also
stuff.
like, everything's like real kind of funny by playing it straight, you know? He's not telling jokes, he's just like muttering stuff under his breath.
Yeah, he's just awkward.
Yeah.
All right, so now we are into the episode. I want your thoughts specifically around this. All I wrote was, wow, that intro song.
The theme song. So I messaged you before, like, I still love this show, but as time went on, this theme song got worse and worse for me. So I forget if it made the final cut, but in the first time I met Ron Wassman, we were collabing, and you were there too for an interview for NerdSync. And I think it made the final cut of the video, but Ron had mentioned like how the reason the X-Men 92 theme song doesn't have lyrics in it is because there's no cool way to say X-Men, and this song proves it, I think.
They also had lyrics from Stan Lee, who helped write the lyrics for it to that point.
And there was like spoken stuff at the beginning. It's like, no place to run, no place. I think that was kind of cool, actually. But then it got like really like Broadway-ish.
Like crashing like thunder, I think is one of the lines.
Coming your way.
And here's the thing. I forgive, because this did not get picked up as series, that all of the animation are just clips from the show itself. Like, I'm not going to expect them to like reanimate that. But I was just like, wow, they're throwing everything out here. And it's like, oh, this is literally just the clips from throughout the entire episode that fit best.
Exciting moments from the show and the new sound effects. So the guy that, I don't know, I'm assuming that he wrote this song too, but the guy that's credited for all the music in this pilot is Rob Walsh. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but in his time in where he worked all the way up until then, he's known in Hollywood and music as like he's worked on everything. He's done music for like G.I. Joe, Gem and the Holograms. I think before this, he was working on Muppet Babies and stuff.
Which is like the most iconic theme song of the 80s.
But once again, I'm not sure, even though he's head of music or credits that, it's never clear if he wrote the main things that we know. Like, he did a lot of score for Gem and the Holograms, and he's the main person credited for that. But when people think of Gem and the Holograms, they think of the pop songs in there, and that was done by a woman who isn't like head credit. So I'm not sure where anything fell, because records were terrible back then. But Rob,
as we could tell from this show literally not having an air-on date,
Rob was a very traditional scoring composer, and that shows. If you watch this episode, like, you'll notice, if you're paying attention now that you know this, the music follows the emotions of the show, which sounds obvious but doesn't always happen. So like Ron doing X-Men 92 and stuff, everything, and even Evolution, whoever scored that, or I think we mentioned him before, I can't remember his name now, they all took like a more rock approach. Right. Just kind of like a bed of music. So in this, the score like kind of gradually intensifies or gets nervous as characters do stuff. I think there was it was very similar to a lot of the other Toei animations. It was my vibe on it, where you would have the tension, like you said, it matched up. Like that was a signature of G.I. Joe, a signature of Transformers. Yeah. He did G.I. Joe and Transformers as well. And so I think in the scene where Kitty sees Nightcrawler and then he teleports up to where she is and she gets nervous, you can hear like the music like follow all that. It's like it's score, and then it gets a little tense when he's in front of her and stuff. So that makes sense. If he also wrote the theme song, then that definitely sounds like what a classically trained score composer, his take on a rock song about the X-Men would be, because it was very bravado-y and everything. It's just, I think for me, it was just like too loud, and the first time we saw it, I was like, okay, it's whatever, it's X-Men. But then like it just kept, it was very 70s-ish to me, like super campy, you know?
Yeah, it wasn't as cool as what it was trying to be.
Yeah. Or do you remember the Linda Carter Wonder Woman theme song? Kind of reminds me of like Wonder Woman, where they have to say the name in the thing, and I don't know.
Oh yeah. I mean, that era had, in granted, like, you know, this is the same continuity supposedly as like the Fantastic Four and stuff. None of that shit stuck. If it did, it stuck around for its camp value, not because like people liked it. Like I think we've hit it over the head a million times. We're like, you know, Power Rangers and the other stuff that Ron has worked on, like the X-Men theme, like it just got you going. Yeah. But it still worked. It wasn't just like, it's not pure nostalgia crack. So,
and, you know, now, and you've known Ron and seen him around and stuff, you know, he's kind of like a no shits kind of guy. So like, he's like, I'm not going to dumb it down for kids or try to be bravado-y or whatever. He's like, we're just gonna make a cool song.
Right.
And that's why those shows are like that. But this, I think the only song from like the earlier era that we're talking about, like the 80s or 70s and stuff, theme song that stuck was maybe Spider-Man. You know, like Spider-Man does whatever, Spider Kid. Like,
but I feel like that's still the campy side, not because it was actually good.
And then they like kind of revitalize it in Spider-Verse, or no, Simpsons with Spider-Pig.
With Spider-Pig.
Yeah, same with like the campiness and stuff. But it was
technically now under the Disney umbrella, so Spider-Pig is a part of the continuity.
Yeah.
I hate that I said that out loud.
Simpsons are going to show up in the Spider-Verse.
On the third one.
Yeah.
Yep. So episode kicks off. We see that it is written by Larry Parr, who I don't remember hearing a lot about Larry on it, but just wanted to give him credit because Larry had a lot to deal with, which was everybody wanted to throw everything at this fucking show. And especially at that time, Marvel was more of a toy company rather than a comic book company with who was really like pulling the triggers and stuff like that. And that's actually why there's so much in this episode, including the villains, where like you literally had people paired together for the first time in this show before they were in the comics in certain cases.
Oh, wow.
Like the White Queen was never associated to the Brotherhood ever.
Oh, okay.
But they needed to have a female antagonist, so she just kind of got lumped in with Magneto and crew.
And she had like a strangely like snake voice.
Yeah, she was very raspy. She was kind of like Baroness from
I was gonna say,
G.I. Joe.
Yeah, and as a kid, I never thought twice about it, but like now watching it back, I'm like, oh, was she like they characterize her like that? Okay, yeah. And I mentioned before we started recording, like so like whenever I in the Evolution or 92 episodes where I'm like, oh, not a lot happened in this episode. This is the opposite of that. Everything happened. And like there's not a it's like YouTube vlog editing. Something's happening every 5 frames.
There are shots that are literally 4 frames long, I feel like. Like I might be like being hyperbolic, but there are shots that are a second and a half, and that's legit. That's not me being hyperbolic.
And I might be wrong, but I think outside of maybe 2 cutaways, like time cutaways or whatever, the whole thing maybe happens in like roughly half an hour, like about the same length as the show, because it just bang.
It is 22 minutes.
Yeah,
it is a timed for TV 22-minute built in with commercials because the
events of the episode I think happen in that same time period in real time.
It's probably maybe 6 hours, but yeah.
Well, because there's like 2 parts where they cut where like, okay, maybe we don't know how long they were on that jet or whatever, but besides that, Kitty arrives at the mansion and then this shit just goes wild for the next hour.
So episode kicks off and we get what Eric Lewald talked about in previously on the making of an animated series. Stan Lee doing the narration, and holy shit, I love so much of the work that Stan did, but him doing that at the beginning was painful. It was legitimately not enjoyable to listen to.
I liked it, but I guess I also just remember it might just be nostalgia. I can't even see if it's like actually good or not. It kind of reminds me of Grandpa and Princess Bride.
I could see that, but I also didn't like that part.
Yeah, right.
He's like, I mean, granted, it may have worked at the time if they stuck to this is a show for kids that doesn't age well, like the He-Man syndrome that I've talked about. Like there's certain shows that you go back and you watch them as an adult and you just ruin your childhood. I feel like that would have the same effect if that had been the show as a whole.
Yeah. And was that something Stan like required? Because I feel like that would be something he would like want, because he did it for a lot of shows. I believe he essentially demanded it, and they fought tooth and nail to prevent it from happening. I hope I'm not misquoting him, but I think I remember Ron saying that there was an original proposition for 92 to have Stan speak during the theme song. I'm not sure. I have to ask him about that.
Yeah, I can't confirm because that interview we did with Ron was so long ago now in real time. I don't remember, but he definitely wanted to be narrating the start of every episode. So
yeah,
but yeah, it's very heavy-handed, which also went along with the toy comment I made earlier, where it's like the X-Men are there to save, and then they're the bad mutants, and it's like, oh, we're just there's no shades of gray here. This is G.I. Joe and Cobra. This is Autobots and fucking Decepticons. It was not sophisticated story time. It was Saturday morning cartoon storytelling.
And this was something I didn't notice until rewatching as a 41-year-old. Magneto straight up calls himself a terrorist.
I was going to get to that. So as Stan is giving the explanation of what this world is, you see a bird almost get hit by a military convoy. I still didn't know what the fuck the point of the bird was. I thought it was like, oh, is this like Mystique or something? Because Mystique was in the video game, which we'll talk about the video game at some point, I'm sure. But yeah, there's an angry soldier who's like screaming at Magneto. And to your point, yes, he literally says that they are mutant terrorists.
It happens a couple times in this episode.
Yeah, but he like owns it. And it's like, I'm pretty sure in any scenario, the people who are terrorists do not call themselves terrorists. They will use phrases like freedom fighter and stuff like that, but literally never admitting to being terrorists.
And I guess we also don't know what he did to get locked up. That's something else.
I'm gonna go with terrorism.
Right. Would it be funny? He's like, oh, he got a speeding ticket.
That's how they caught him.
Yeah.
His plates were expired.
Right. That army guy, he was like that. He didn't actually have a cigar, but he had that vibe of like cigar chewing, like military.
Oh, yeah. Like he was he was too fat for his suit or kind of scenario.
Yeah.
Like that was not a guy who had seen active combat in a long time.
And then he was saying like, you don't even deserve to live.
Yeah. Next to normal, decent human beings. And that's where Magneto is like, well, once my brotherhood of mutant terrorists is done, the humans won't have a spot with us. And I'm like, okay, cool, got it.
I kind of like how they don't try to do very much origin story with this pilot. They're just like, action's happening, catch up. And I think that's pretty cool.
So we find out quickly his name is Colonel Jaffe. Magneto's like, yeah, we're going to kill all of you. He just like wants to not even pistol whip him, just hit him with the butt of his machine gun. Mm-hmm. And at the time, the truck takes like a sharp turn, which causes him to trip and fall. And then we go outside and everybody is abandoning their vehicles because there's quicksand. I think we've talked about this in the past. this just furthers my theory that we had this like image that quicksand was going to be fucking everywhere when we were adults, and we had to know how to escape from quicksand.
I love the way they animated it too, because even though they said it was quicksand, it just looked like the asphalt was liquefying, like the highway, like, or I don't know what's on the road. Is that asphalt? Okay, because I've had people correct me on that. It's like, it's not
what's on a road?
Listen, man, I'm a musician.
You've had a long month. I get it. January, no excuses. December, I get it.
But this image was so cool, and once again to remind you how fast things are happening. I think this is like within a minute of that opening monologue from Magneto to them getting interrupted.
I would say less than a minute.
Yeah, like not even a minute has passed before like the road is liquefying. And I love Jaffe's things. He's like, what's going on out there? And he's like, where's everything sinking? He's like, we're in the middle of the highway. Like, where's the water? He's like, it's not water, sir. It's quicksand. He's like, what the?
It's like, that still doesn't make sense. There's not quicksand on a road, but whatever. And you get the reveal that it is mental power manipulation from White Queen. You see that it's fake. And then this was a thing that wasn't a thing. She throws a light spear at people. That's not a thing. You know how sometimes you're like, oh, is that one of her powers in the comics? No. Straight up, no.
This is going to drive you crazy. But for me and my brother, that was always cemented as one of her like core things because of that. That's the first time we saw her.
Fair.
Yeah, because we were like, oh, she can make people hallucinate. Or at the time, we even considered maybe she is actually changing things.
Right.
You know, and then resetting it. But then she's like, and she can throw lightning.
And just for point of saying it, obviously we know current version of White Queen, especially after First Class and such, the ability to turn into a diamond form. Mm-hmm. The diamond form did not get introduced until 2001 in the comics. It was a secondary mutation for her.
And I didn't know that of her until in the movies when she did it.
in First Class.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when that happens, Magneto is able to break free. He takes the gun and splits it into multiple parts and like makes like a little device to wrap up the general, and then just shoots a fucking hole through the ceiling, which again does not resemble how his powers actually would work, because everybody just has fucking like Kamehameha fucking like
energy blast.
Hadouken blast through the fucking ceiling, and then he shoots the Colonel out of it, who lands in like it looked like a puddle of water by a dam or something. Like, that was so random that he just landed in water.
Well, I guess he had to land in some water, right? Because he just made fun of the guys for there not being water on the highway.
I guess, yeah. And then in what I recognize most as the same animation style as the arcade cabinet of Magneto goes into the electric ball and goes up in the air.
Yeah. That's so cool. Such a cool cold open.
Yeah. Well, not even a cold open.
It's not cold. It's after the...
this is after its credit, but that's like your kickoff to this pilot.
Yeah, I say cold open because I think I remember me and my brother just skipping that theme song a lot.
Understandable. You literally are like recording over it with commercials instead. We jump over, and it is a taxi pulling up to the mansion, and Kitty's like, "Hey, do you mind waiting?" And the cab driver's like, "No, this place is fucking creepy," and speeds off.
And that's another thing, a lot of these shows were never quite clear. Like X-Men 92, like mutants were like kind of starting to creep into public consciousness. Evolution, as far as we know, isn't like, we'll see what happens with the dance, but like isn't known.
Yeah.
This one, they're well established. Everybody knows about them.
At the very least, they're weirdos, and we don't trust the weirdos.
But they don't even try to hide when they when they have their first mission. They just like go do it. They're not worried about cloaking themselves or anything, and everyone's super skilled. I kind of like that. That we have that out there. There's a version of the X-Men that we started like right in the middle of like their peak.
Right. So Kitty is reading a note, and it's essentially Xavier's voice, just calling out that she has powers. Like, just literally. Just go to your point.
Yeah. And she decides to go. Like, this is such an iconic scene to me. I don't know why. I think it's because it's like the first time that we're considering like that could be me. And I know she was meant to be that. Like, Kitty in this pilot was supposed to be like our eyes and stuff. But it was like, man, it was like
what Jubilee would become for us in 92.
Yeah. But this, like, just her in front of the house reading the note and, like, deciding whether to go in or not, and then being scared and, like, learning that she has superpowers and stuff. I don't know. It's, like, kind of cool. Nothing's really happening. She's, like, reading a piece of paper.
And you also get the reveal that she left without even telling her parents.
Yeah. And then we find out because she says it later. She was 14, even though she's animated being like 25.
She has the hair of a 25-year-old.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
She's very petite, but she's got the hair of a 25-year-old. She has a full fucking perm going.
Yeah.
Also, all the doors are automatic. I don't know if you ever picked up on that, but the doors literally open and close for people.
At that time, I thought it was just like Xavier opening the front doors for her and stuff. So.
Which it could absolutely be, but that was a consistent thing throughout the episode. In the mansion, is doors would open and close for people.
And she also didn't question it. She was like,
no.
Okay, that's normal.
So she walks in, and then Xavier does the creepiest thing possible, which is by greeting her in an astral projection form.
Yeah. And I was like trying to come to grips with that. I was like, I didn't question it as a kid, but now I'm like, oh, because he doesn't want to move around. But it's like, he's already in like the wheelchair, hover chair thing.
Wheelchair, no hover chair in this one.
Or, whatever, like whatever he has, like, and he was only down the hall.
Right.
So
this did not save any time either. Like,
I think he just wanted to queue up all the video clips. Because this was like, we always make a joke about theater kids. Like, okay, this is one of those, like he wants the
dramatic fucks.
He wants the entrance music.
Yeah, so he walks her down the hallway, and then he purposely goes through the wall instead of even doing the astral form through the door, which, again, theater kid. And there's a bunch of screens, and you get a 4-way split where you see in the order Dazzler, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, and Cyclops. And then you see a horizontal split screen where you get Storm and Colossus on there. This is the only time where Dazzler has been in the animated series as an X-Men.
Oh, okay.
So all the other iterations that we see of the X-Men in animated, this is the only time Dazzler is formally a part of the team.
I also think this is like my favorite Dazzler design. Maybe it's because of the first time I saw her and stuff, but I just thought it was really cool with the jacket and the blue suit and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and again, the first time I saw that design was her on the side of the arcade cabinet, and that was, but nobody wanted to be Dazzler because her mutant power was the worst of the group.
I could kind of see that. I like the idea of just like having energy blasts, and in the
I don't mean her as a character. I mean in the video game, it was the worst implemented. Like you had the biggest shot of missing, basically.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, because it was like a small projectile.
Yeah, it was like I throw a bomb like 15 feet in front of me and I hope they're there. One of the sources I found online said that originally this was supposed to match the team from Giant Size X-Men #1, but they swapped out Thunderbird with Dazzler to put a second woman on the team at the time.
Oh, very forward thinking.
If that's true, I'm not. That one, I had a hard time finding a source to support it, but that was one of the things that was there. Because if you do look at it, that is the team from Giant Size minus Banshee and Sunfire.
So it's not just like Storm there by herself.
Yeah. But to your point of what do people know, she knows that the X-Men are mutants, and she says it to Xavier, and he kind of like cuts her off, like brushing it off of like, yeah, we're mutants.
Yeah. So the way she says it kind of leads you to believe that like that's not a good thing, or it's not perceived good to the general public. Right.
Because she's questioning, how does Professor X know about her? Not even her parents know. And he gives the info dump on Cerebro. And that's where, like we were just saying, she calls herself a freak. And I don't know why. That was what stood out to me in the first 2 seasons of Evolution, where Kitty would like to call the non-X-Men mutants freaks. So.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, it's like kind of a part of her character. I think about
that. Right. Yeah, it was, and I have not read enough young Kitty stories to know if that was like a consistent thing with her, but it just kind of stood out because we've recently been watching Evolution for the first time. So she's freaked out. Xavier's like, we were all afraid at one point, and then decides the best way to make her feel better is to take her into the control room for the danger room.
And show everybody training.
Yeah. So you have Cyclops, who is fighting like on the ruins, and there's like skeletons. Oh, he takes down what was like just like a giant top is the best way I could describe it. It was like the statue that he takes down. And they mentioned that he shoots concentrated blasts of pure energy. I kind of like that he gives like kind of like informed versions of how they use their powers. You then see underneath these ruins that they're fighting in, Colossus is running, and then as he's about to get whacked by these traps, that he's impervious to harm when he's in his metal form. I forgot how he actually described it. You have Dazzler, who makes finger guns.
I love that shot.
and then kills murder plants.
Yeah, it's like giant Venus flytraps or something. There was something
and blows them up.
I love the way the cinematography in that shot happens too, because it kind of like swoops around her, you know? Like it's very sophisticated animation, especially for this time.
I mean, that was one of the things that like was there for some of these G.I. Joe style shots and stuff with Toei. Like that was why Toei was as good as they were.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I that shot of her being tangled up in all the vines and stuff, and then making finger guns and like shooting up the plant stuff. I don't know. That I think it's in the intro too. It's just always like something that stuck in my head with Dazzler. I was like, oh man. And then I forgot that she had a real name. And when you said it, I was like, oh, that's right. All these people have real names. I just always know her as Dazzler.
Then you have Nightcrawler, and they specify line of sight teleportation, which we reference in our most recent Evolution episode as being tied to his powers. And then you see Wolverine slicing through some stuff. And then what was known as like one of the things that Stan would say was that Storm's weather control wasn't completely understood.
Yeah, I love it.
And then she's like, well, what do you do? And he's like, well, I see into people's minds.
And she was like, into people's minds. And he kind of like reassured, he's like, don't worry, I do it ethically.
Which we've seen two Xaviers do. Evolution, no.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, I love this design of Storm. There's something really regal about it. Although when they do some close-ups, I'm like, that poor woman is in a bikini, basically. But I love the cape and the headband, I guess, that's on her.
I mean, it kind of has crown vibes to it, too. And yeah, there's something about this design that, yes, while it is very much that, like, little bit cheesecakey with the amount of skin that she's showing and such, but, like, it also has, like, a regalness to her. Like, she doesn't feel like just she's part of the spandex crew, you know?
Yes, yeah.
And we should point out this version of Wolverine is the brown and yellow version of Wolverine for his color scheme. Just throwing that out
also
there.
Also really cool. My brother loved that action figure, the retractable claws. Mm-hmm. Was actually one claw with just like markings on it.
It just had grooves in it. Yeah. Because, if we were kids, man, with 3 individual claws, those things would have been broken in a heartbeat. And then I have horny Nightcrawler teleports into control room.
This is what I also remembered was Nightcrawler's accent was also so thick it was almost offensive, but he's basically Pepe Le Pew, but German.
Okay, I can see that.
Because he was trying to like grab her hand to kiss her palm, right? And then she's like, whoa.
Right. And Kitty freaked out because Nightcrawler is obviously the most dramatically different in appearance, starts phasing through the controls, which activates the Storm sequence, which Storm immediately is able to stop, so it felt kind of like a throwaway.
Yeah.
And then she lands into Naked Peter, is how I describe him.
Oh, yeah, when he's not in his metal form.
When he's not in metal form, that design always, like, felt weird. Like, there's no other way to describe it. He was basically in, like, just a slightly more covered up version of the Borat swimsuit at that point.
Yeah,
like
because his whole side is showing.
Yeah.
I mean, dude's
so
built,
at least if Storm is half naked, he's half naked too.
It's equal. And also, if I was built like that, I might show off a little bit too.
Would you?
I mean, if I look like that, yeah.
Fair. Yeah. If you were a 6'6" Russian man, you would do that.
Yeah, with like muscles on top of muscles.
Yeah. And then Wolverine is instantly pissed. Let's talk about the Wolverine voice. That's the fucking elephant in the room of this entire episode, which I was warned about, but I was not ready for. Because I somehow made it through 2 years of doing this podcast without ever hearing it. I'd seen the theme song of like that. I'd seen one of the other scenes, but I had never actually heard the voice. And holy shit, Rod.
Yeah, it is not subtle. Now, the guy, whoever did it, they did a great job, right? Like,
no shit talk on him, but it just goddamn does not fit.
It is a decision, especially because even I knew at the time that, well, I didn't know at the time, but relatively around this time, that Wolverine is canonically Canadian. And so to make him like hard Australian, like not even some Australians are like this Australian, it was such a decision. And like, I guess it kind of fit into how the X-Men were supposed to kind of represent the world, you know, because like Colossus had a very thick Russian accent, Nightcrawler, you know, has
German
accent. The Wolverine, it was like one click away from like Dingo ate my baby, you know. And I think Larry Houston at the panel at this most recent LA Comic-Con said like the reason they got it is because one of the investors in this, because Margaret Lesh had pulled together so much money from different places, said that because Crocodile Dundee was such a huge thing that they needed to have like an Australian character in it.
And Mad Max was also popular at the time.
And so they like shoehorned him in there, and that was one of the things that Larry and Leewald said that they learned that Larry learned from Pride going into 92 is like, we absolutely have to have control of the characterizations of these these characters.
Yep.
So this never happens again. And that was like one of their demands.
And it was almost to the point where they were going to swap Wolverine's nationality in the comics too.
Oh, really?
I honestly think had this gone well, they would have pushed through of him being like essentially an Australian expat in Canada.
That's so funny because, like, I don't know what my brother thinks about it now, but at the time, Peter made Australian Wolverine his entire personality. So I guess like the little Crocodile Dundee thing kind of worked because it was like such a distinctive characterization that it was easy. You could easily identify yourself as Wolverine by kind of pretending to like sharpen your blades on your hands and then saying something about a dingo. That was your Halloween costume. Yeah, this is probably the most memorable thing, good or bad, from this pilot that everybody talks about because it is so loud.
It's jarring. It's just, there's no other way I could describe it. It is just fucking jarring, dude.
And his accent takes away from how grumpy I think they're trying to make him, you know?
Yeah, it becomes a joke.
Because the whole time he's like, and she's just a baby. And then it's not even growls.
Somehow you just offended an entire country right there.
And he even like does a little like snarl, but not in like a threatening way. It's like when my cat does it, my little 10-pound black cat. So funny. It's like, it seems like a very small mammal, you know, that's growling.
Like a Wolverine.
Maybe. I don't know if I've ever heard a Wolverine growl.
Oh. I feel like they're very similar to honey badgers. Storm scolds him and then makes a mini cloud above his head.
I love it. Once again, love the Storm energy. She's a goddess, but she's also petty.
I will say, of everything from the show, the mini cloud was the most Saturday morning cartoon vibey thing for me, though.
Yeah. And Storm in this one, to me, like, remember in 92, like, we were like, is she controlling weather outside of Earth's atmosphere and blah, blah, blah? In this one, they always, like, centered the weather coming from her, like, within. So it's like the storm cloud wasn't, like, aggregated from nature.
No,
like,
she just literally created the cloud.
And same thing when they go to space later. It's like, oh, she can create an atmosphere or something. It's just, like, something that's part of her.
So at that point, you get a random alarm that goes off. Find out it's a mutant alert, so that means the training session is over. And Kitty's like, oh, shit. And then she starts to follow everybody. You realize she's going to get left behind because you see there are two jets. There's the Blackbird and then a mini jet because the Blackbird apparently isn't big enough.
Yeah.
And that felt like a toy decision to me.
Oh, I didn't think about that. Yeah. Was it Wolverine and Nightcrawler or the mini jet thing? All of them left.
I mean, I get it. If you have an active team of 6 and Professor X could stay back at the mansion, yeah, sure. I buy that.
Then this next moment, this was the Saturday morning cartoon moment for me.
That Magneto and the Juggernaut are there and they're like, yeah, they fell for it. Yeah. Let's go fuck shit up.
With binoculars posing on a rock.
Oh,
Captain
yeah.
Morgan style. Like,
no.
He's like, oh, yes, they fell for it.
Kind of like Sabretooth and Wolverine in 97.
Yeah, there you go.
There's also like laser defenses on the lawn.
Yeah, right. Which
the thing I thought was interesting about this design for the Juggernaut, the helmet is like a little more like flushed into his suit rather than being a thing on top of it.
Yeah, that's what me and my brother are familiar with.
Yeah, where if you look at, there's alternate reality where like Mayday Parker becomes Spider-Girl, and there's essentially like, I think it's like Juggernaut Jr. basically is in that world. That's the design I associate to it. By the time I started reading comics, that design was not consistent with Juggernaut. The design from 92 was the standard at that point.
Gotcha.
So this must have been like a transition time for the Juggernaut's design, basically.
And once again, they throw so much at you because we obviously got an introduction to Magneto just like minutes before. But then as Juggernaut's like running at the mansion, Xavier's giving exposition. He's like, unfortunately, that's my stepbrother. Like, wait, what?
Oh, yeah. We have to stop them because if they ever win, all humans are going to become slaves to the evil mutants. Like, again, zero gray.
Yeah.
And like, if this is a scale from 1 to 10, you have one team that's a 1 and one team that's a 10. You have nothing in the middle.
And Kitty has realistically been there, even in her time, probably maybe 10, 15 minutes.
I was going to say 15 minutes at best.
At max. Is if we account for maybe time jumps from going room to room. But they didn't cut enough to even show that. So more likely, within a few minutes of arriving, all of this goes down.
And then I feel like after the first mistake, Xavier should get his shit together and not let her stand near controls because she gets freaked out again, phases into the controls, and just shuts down the defenses. To be fair, the defenses weren't doing fuck all anyway, but still.
I do like that they thought about that, though. It's like, how are these two, like, how are these mutants going to get past the defenses if, you know, like, Xavier knows about them and stuff, but they have that little story point of, like, oh, the new, like, the wild card kind of, like, fucked things up unknowingly.
Yep. So he uses his telepathy to read Magneto's mind, and it's like, oh, he wants the mutant power circuit, which... We asked this in a previous episode, and I did not have a good answer for you about when Magneto's helmet started being used to stop Xavier's telepathic powers.
Yeah.
That did not happen until New X-Men 136 in 2003.
Oh, okay. So much later.
Yes. I looked it up specifically because I knew we had addressed it in the past, and I didn't have a good answer for you because we only knew when it got introduced in the movies. But yeah, that was not formally like a thing until later. So
gotcha. That makes There's a few things in here where they'll have to come back and retcon or whatever.
So Kitty grabs the MacGuffin, and then Juggernaut and Magneto bounce into the control room. And Xavier gives like the shade to his stepbrother. He's like, you know, you've always been welcome in my home, but I question your choice of friend. It's like, this is gonna end poorly.
Then Magneto is like, he chose his friends wisely.
So Kitty starts running off. Magneto follows, and then Juggernaut just like slaps Xavier.
Right.
Yeah. Magneto starts giving what I call just propaganda to Kitty of like, oh, you don't need to be scared anymore. You could be on the right side of all this.
I love this moment. This is another one of those like iconic moments I always remember. It was him twirling his hand and then the wires coming out of the wall and like capturing her. It's like what an eerie thing as a little kid to see. Like, it was so wild.
Well, the phrasing they use right before that is, you know, we don't need to be enemies. And basically is like, yeah, you don't need to associate with the normal human. So it's that aggressive version of Magneto where it's like, he's not calling her the freak, but the normies would call you a freak.
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot to mention this earlier, but especially with the army guy, when he was with Magneto in the truck, the way he says like muty and all that stuff is it just has the energy of slurs.
Oh, it's 100%.
And more so than in 92 or Evolution. And I didn't put that together until after rewatching 92 and then coming back to this. I'm like, oh wow, this had way more of that
energy,
prejudice energy.
So yeah, Magneto has the wires pop out of the wall that are moving kind of like, it felt like the animation of snakes from G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
And then it zaps her, and then it like she throws the mutant circuit perfectly to Magneto, and then she shifts through the floor.
Yeah.
And then Stan narration pops in, and he mentions that the X-Men are completely unaware, and they go to the Deep Space Observatory, which is a great generic name for a building.
Yeah. And there's like a family trapped in like a fire sphere.
Right, which I believed was supposed to be like at least one was a scientist, or the spouses were scientists who also had their kid at work with them.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Your kid to work day.
Yeah, bring your kid to work day on the worst day possible. And you had Blob and Pyro there, and they're like, well, what do you want? And Blob, this is a version of Blob I do not like.
Oh, okay.
Blob is talking like a fucking moron. I don't like this version of Blob, even compared to the Tutti Frutti Blob and the other one. Yeah, he reads like he's written like Lenny from Of Mice and Men.
Yeah, it's actually perfect. It's funny you say that too, though, because like for me, for whatever reason, once again, maybe it's because the first time I saw him, like this is the Blob and Pyro. They're like ingrained in my head, and Pyro, for whatever reason, actually works as Australian for me.
Was he Australian? I honestly can't tell the difference between some of these accents. So.
It sounded like it was. Someone tell me if I'm wrong. He didn't go quite as far as like talking about dingoes and stuff, but his characters seemed more. I don't know what it was. The characterization of it just seemed more on. But it is funny how those two end up getting paired. Well, no, they don't get paired up. Never mind. I was thinking of Avalanche.
But they're in one of the episodes, the Tutti Frutti episode. They're there for Mystique.
But
what is he canonically in the comics? I'm forgetting. Raised in Sydney, Australia. You're right.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, and maybe that's part of the thing is like he seemed more of like an actual Australian, like a real Australian person. And Wolverine in this seemed like a cartoon of an Australian person.
Right.
But yeah, so this whole thing was like a distraction, obviously. Yep. They did this kind of in like a reverse order. They showed us like what was actually happening and then where everybody went.
you see the actual attack, and then Yeah, I don't know. It was a whole thing. And then, he's talking about getting the tracking coordinates for the Scorpio comet, which it just sounds like the most Saturday morning cartoon name for, because it's also like that's a constellation. Like, are you really going to call a comet? Anyway, and the X-Men arrive and they're like, well, we were expecting you. And it's like, mustache twirling Saturday morning villains at that point.
Yeah. And Scott was like, expecting us. Can I also say, because they did a close-up on him, I love this design of Cyclops where his eyes, instead of being one solid beam, are like the two kind of like, almost like a TV noise,
Yeah.
Like, there's something cool about it, like they're kind of glowing underneath the thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great version of Cyclops' outfit for me. Before Jim Lee got to it in the 90s, like, this is such a good version of Cyclops. I've always dug the look on this one. So
yeah, really cool. Like, it has the bald cap on.
Right. Colossus goes in and tries to like bear hug the Blob, and it does not work.
And then Blob gives his exposition where he's unmovable.
Yeah.
He's like, not. I guess that's different than, like you mentioned before, like it's different than just being heavy. He's just dense.
Right. It's a density control who he also just happens to be fat. And they basically say that, like, yeah, in 2 days, you're all fucked.
Yeah. I honestly, as much as I love this pilot and watched it so many times, I've forgotten that asteroid hitting the Earth was like the main thing that they were trying to avoid.
So Pyro puts up a flame wall. Storm is able to stop it with wind. And yeah, they escape. And then there's just like this awkward moment where Nightcrawler gives the teddy bear back to the kid. And the kid is okay with Nightcrawler, but the parents are not.
This is one of those moments that is either a Stan thing or a Larry thing or something, but it kept in the spirit of, what the X-Men were always about, where it's like, prejudice is like a taught behavior.
Right. And then the parent drops the filthy mutant line again.
Yeah. Which is, it's interesting because the way, I don't know what they were intended to be, but the way they drew the parents, it looked like maybe they were like a mixed couple, and the daughter was mixed too stuff. So it's like, wow. So like in this version of humanity, they made it to that point, but then not further with the mutants.
So at that point, you realize the cops are arriving, and they exit through the ceiling with the tornado, I guess.
Yeah, they don't show them breaking through the ceiling, but
you have to assume there was a skylight there.
Right. And it broke through.
Go. And then we jump over to Asteroid M, and Toad is Igor from fucking Frankenstein. That is the character.
Also, could we point out that Asteroid M looks like a over easy, like sunny side up, like egg?
You're not wrong.
Okay. We'll put an image up of it somewhere. The way they drew it's like, oh, it's an egg. But yeah, he's Igor. He's also so funny. I didn't know it was Frank Welker, but he's so funny in this. So
we get more of the evil plan and such. And then Magneto kicks Lockheed for no reason.
I forgot that Lockheed was in this at all.
Well, they never call him out by name.
I think the thing, they never call him out, but like, I didn't think I knew about him until that awful New Mutants movie came out. Mm-hmm. And I had the conversation with you that Kitty usually had Lockheed and stuff.
Yeah.
I guess it's because I didn't know who he was. I didn't have a frame of reference to recognize him in this. He's just some strange creature on Asteroid M. But yeah, he's basically like a cat.
Yeah.
Walking around Asteroid M.
He's just chilling there. Like he's just a random dragon.
Magneto tells Toad to go play in an airlock. And that was what was funny to me was when Toad...
That was great. That was a great line.
Like, oh, play in an airlock? That doesn't make any sense. Like...
But Toad is an idiot and is like, okay, cool, I'll go. And then he chases the dragon. Then we jump back and we see what is officially the start of the Let's Destroy the Mansion that has continued throughout the animated series. They find Xavier under a bunch of rubble. They pull him out. And then Scott clears a table by shooting it. It's Homer Simpson with a gun.
Yeah, but that follows the rules of
does,
power.
But okay. He also could have just swiped his arms across it. He did not need to shoot the table to clear it.
But I appreciate getting to see those powers.
Yes. Xavier starts to regain consciousness. At the same time, Kitty starts to wake up where she is found by Nightcrawler, Wolverine, and Dazzler and gets freaked out again by Nightcrawler. Like, her whole MO is she's scared for the first half of the show.
Which is so funny because in the same session we're recording this, we just recorded Evolution Shadow Dance episode. And it's not a lot of Kitty and Nightcrawler going back and forth, and in Evolution in general.
Yeah.
It's just funny like to realize, like, even as far as back as the first animated X-Men thing, Kitty and Nightcrawler have just always had this kind of flirty history.
Right. After realizing that this girl is not dead, Wolverine calls Kitty a whiny brat.
She kind of is, though.
But then she like balls up and is ready to fight him.
Yeah, she's had enough of this shit.
I love that she's scared to death of the blue fuzzy guy who's been nothing but nice to her, but she's ready to fight the guy with fucking claws.
Yeah. Isn't he like sharpening his claws too?
Probably.
Like, I told you she couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
But then Storm points out, she's like, well, none of us could have taken on Magneto by ourselves.
And the Juggernaut together, yeah.
Let alone someone who literally entered this mansion 10 minutes ago.
At this point, it's maybe 2.5 hours, I feel like.
Yeah. But at the time when she fought him.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Within like minutes.
Yeah. And then Kitty kind of like owns up that she failed, which again, to your point, she's been there for 15 minutes before getting attacked by the biggest mutant terrorist on the planet. And then Professor X uses his telepathy, realizes that they're on asteroid M, and Magneto has the power circuit. And then he realizes the plan that Magneto's going to hit the planet with a comet.
And it's not quite clear why the mutant power circuit would be able to harness the gravity of an asteroid, but it doesn't matter. Or the comet.
It is totally like, it is the MacGuffin. It is the weather generator from the G.I. Joe movie. Like, it is all of those things. Yeah, it's the Allspark. Oh, God. Fucking Allspark.
Except it's a sphere instead of a cube. Just going through shapes.
I know what you're doing, and I'm just not going to give you acknowledgement. So we cut to commercial. Stan tells everybody that mankind is doomed in less than a day. So I'm assuming that means this happened in a day, based on us trying to place together like what is the timeline of start of this to end of this.
Yeah, because they said it'd be 2 days. In 2 days the world would end.
And they're basically like, yep, if they succeed, it's going to be another ice age. And everybody is like, all right, let's fucking go. But then they're like, no, Kitty, it's too dangerous for you to come with us. Enjoy the mansion for the last 6 hours of your life.
Right. And she's like, no, I want to go. She's basically Jubilee in this episode.
Well, Jubilee's basically her. Yeah. So she follows. And then they have the best radio reception I have ever seen, because they're in the jet in space getting the reception, being like, yep, so there's a comet that's coming right to Earth and we're all going to fucking die.
It's that outer space public radio.
Yeah, apparently. And then the phrase I never thought I would hear is, oh, okay, cool, we're going into a parking orbit.
I don't know what that is.
I mean, I'm assuming it's just like we're in a safe distance. Also, Magneto and his team have no security measures on the asteroid, I guess.
It's a giant egg.
Yeah. You think they would have any windows to be able to see. Everybody is in like really weird spacesuits.
It kind of, that whole shot of them exiting the spaceship.
I was wondering if you were going to say this.
It kind of reminded me of the shot from the Guardians of the Galaxy. And I know that Guardians was like referencing 2001 Space Odyssey and stuff, but like, I don't know, I guess it's something about like a superhero team from Marvel exiting space. It's just a very similar vibe.
And also wearing suits that were not like indicative of like the characters themselves. Like, yes, it had like the X across them, but it didn't look like, oh, that's an X-Men spacesuit,
Yeah, and actually speaking to that too, it didn't seem like they were tailored to each individual character.
Yeah.
Cyclops shoots his beam out his thing and it doesn't bust his helmet. And there's no like, it doesn't look like it's made special or anything.
So I did notice that. I do think there was a little bit of coloration to it that gave the impression it was like the ruby visor for him to be able to do that. Yeah. I don't know if that's just how it was animated or if it was intentional, but I got a vibe. I was like, oh, Cyclops just shot through his visor.
Right. And I didn't think twice about it when I was a kid. So this is something I'm nitpicking as I'm older, but like, this way he just shot.
It's what we do. But then they point out that Storm is there to basically like seal the breach, so that they basically do a good job here of how they eliminate X-Men by X-Men of going through these, the set of encounters. So cool. We know Storm is out of commission because she has to make sure the airlock doesn't suck them all out into space. And I think that lends itself to like what we've talked about, because at the time, Omega level mutant was never even a phrase. That was not a thing in the 80s going into the 90s. But it's like, yeah, if there was somebody who could do this shit, it would be Storm, because she's that powerful with her weather control.
And like I mentioned earlier, like in this iteration of her, she's exuding the weather instead of like harnessing existing weather.
Right.
So they're saying like she can create like an atmosphere, hold that airlock closed. And it's funny you mentioned with like eliminating X-Men by X-Men. It's such a video game setup, but also they didn't use this premise for the video game. And it's better for it. I like the beat 'em up style of it.
Yeah.
But it's just so funny that this whole ending sequence is set up like a console game.
It's set up like a modern video game, not an arcade cabinet, and that's the big difference. Yeah, it's closer to the Ninja Turtles NES game than the Ninja Turtles arcade game.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, so it's such a console setup. And but even the console X-Men games never really did this.
Right. So the X-Men are inside. Wolverine has already gotten out of his suit. Everybody else is still in their spacesuits, but Wolverine's like, nope, fuck it, I'm here. Dazzler, I believe, turns the power off. And at that point, Toad hops onto Wolverine. You get a Dingo reference.
Yep.
And then Wolverine traps him behind a wall.
This is funny because I was like, as a kid, I always thought like that meant that he stayed behind to kill Toad. He's just standing watch to make sure he doesn't escape, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like Wolverine should have just offed him, personally.
Yeah, but when I was a kid, I was like, oh, he's like, they're leaving so that we don't see Toad get his head cut off.
You had some dark thoughts as a kid, Rod.
You know, there's a man with knives for hands.
Yeah. I've always made the joke, like, you can't use a battle axe in pro wrestling because if you do, you can't kill the person in the ring with you. And then somebody tried to do it a couple of years ago, and I screamed at the TV when that happened. Yeah,
you can't, because we want to see it being used.
It's the problem with Triple H's sledgehammer. If you swing a sledgehammer, you kill a person. Which is why when Triple H hits a person, he's holding it like at the edge and he just kind of like nudges them with it. And I'm like, that's not how you use a sledgehammer, sir.
It was like the Ninja Turtles, how they can never like stab anybody with anything.
Oh, especially the standards and practices, even though they were robots. Yeah. Also, that kid died in the first movie. Just want to point that out. They changed it after the fact and added VO, but he was dead.
Oh, okay.
You then get Colossus and Juggernaut, who basically have a test of strength using a vent.
Oh, yeah.
Cyclops and the White Queen pair off. Nightcrawler teleports past the blob. You see at the screen, Magneto's there. And it's like, in 3 minutes, you're all fucked.
Supervillain monologue is too confident.
Yeah. One of the things that I did read, which I completely agree with the logic on this, is if Magneto's whole plan was to make the Earth uninhabitable and kill all the humans, I don't know if they were all planning on reproducing with the White Queen, but there's not enough people surviving to make this a thing right now.
I didn't think about that. Yeah, because I'd always thought that he was implying that only mutants would survive the blast, but he's saying that only the mutants on Asteroid M would survive.
Here's the thing, man. Mutants aren't invulnerable. If you create the next Ice Age, I want to know how you're saving those. Because, okay, let's assume they're not in the spot that gets ruined by flood or the impact of the fucking thing. It's like, do you have the ability to find the remaining ones? Or why didn't you get them off in the first place?
Yeah.
It is the bad Saturday morning cartoon logic at that point. And again, I think that probably had to do with the toy decisions at that point, because they were just like, we need the crystal clear good guys and the crystal clear bad guys.
Yeah. That's the Saturday morning thing. It's like, you got to know who to root for.
At that point, Kitty has phased inside and she gets into a struggle. She charges everybody except for Nightcrawler, who's the most gentle person she's encountered. She charges, and then Lockheed bites his ankle. When that happens, Magneto ends up blasting the circuit and gets tackled into the control pad, for lack of a better term, the thing he was standing on earlier, essentially.
Yeah. And then was it Xavier got into Kitty's mind? It's like, Kitty, now?
Yes. So Nightcrawler fuses the circuit and is basically acting as a conductor, which ends up changing the course of the comet, which I don't know how that works, but I'm going to just go with it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Also looks very painful.
Yes, and then it's like, oh yeah, he can't let go, because if he does let go, the circuit is going to break and the comet is going to go back on Earth's trajectory, which the science in this show is not good.
And Magneto, once again, they're painting him as like, he's just straight up a villain. Like, there's no...
Yeah, it's like, I didn't win, but at least one of y'all didn't make it. And then he makes his, magnetic ball, and he brings the Brotherhood with him, which they would all die in the vacuum of space.
I guess magnetism is airtight.
I don't think that works like that. Also, Blob, feel like breathes very, very heavy.
Yeah, is also very heavy.
Yeah, but he could be like, I'm just going to not be dense right now.
Yeah, right.
But also, we'll use all the oxygen.
Yeah.
Nightcrawler is telling Kitty to go, and then Xavier gives the oh, well, I'm going to put this on the view screen as the way to let you know where to go.
I didn't notice that until watching it now that I'm older, because maybe back then I didn't realize that he had it. And they said line of sight, but I didn't register that. Yeah, so like, does that work that way? If you see a picture of something?
I guess if you could picture where it is and you have the best spatial awareness ever.
Yeah, which I guess he
didn't.
He was off. Yeah. So
well, because he's holding it until the comet has actually hit the base. So the Blackbird obviously needs to take off. They can't wait any longer. And then he teleports just kind of like into space, and he starts just like dropping down at like, free fall velocity.
Yeah. And is it Storm that points out like he's going to burn up? Re-entering Earth's atmosphere.
And then they're like, use the grapple beams, which sounded like a toy accessory.
I don't know if they would animate this today, but they presented us with what we think was him like disintegrating, which seems very violent if that's what would have happened.
Right. But that was just him teleporting. We find out because they're like, I can't see him. He's gone. And then Kitty just like loses it, because she realizes that he's done like the most unselfish thing possible, and she was perpetually an asshole to him.
Right. I was all like, how quickly Xavier just accepted his death. He's like, he's gone now. It's like, okay, we just went straight.
That's
to that.
Our Xavier.
Like, okay,
that's our Chuck.
That? Could you see that clearly from inside the jet?
Dude's got great eyes, man.
Right.
But it's revealed that he has teleported into the closet because there's like a banging noise in there, and they make a comment about how he smells like burnt, basically, which is not the sulfur reference that we talk about in the recent Evolution episode that we reviewed. It's the fact that he was literally burning up in Earth's atmosphere.
Yeah, his fur is singed. Colossus holds him like a beanie baby. He just like holds him up.
You have to screenshot that, because I don't. Off the top of my head, I don't remember it, but it's such a good description. Now you're going to do that with your cat next to that picture.
Yeah. Or I guess I don't know the game, but there was something, was it Resident Evil or something that became a meme? I see a lot of people cosplay this at Comic-Cons, but there's
Lady Dimitrescu.
Was that who it is? And she has somebody pinned against the wall. So without being pinned against the wall, very similar like things like Colossus.
That was Resident Evil Village, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, Colossus is like twice as tall as Nightcrawler. Yep. Nightcrawler is kind of shorter, and he's squatting and stuff, so he like picks him up and it's like, oh, hey.
And then Wolverine is still a fucking asshole.
Probably still sharpening his claws. I can't remember if he's sharpening his claws in every shot. In my head, that's what I remember.
That's what he's always doing.
Every time he talks.
Yeah, and he's like, well, the kid got lucky. She's not an X-Men. Not yet. And it's like...
slow turn.
Okay. And then we get like the quick, weird wrap-up. Stan, who's saying like, the world's safe again, they've won, only for now. And then you have the team standing on the edge of the planet with Xavier's giant head behind them.
The world got real small. It's a great shot though. If it wasn't in like 10p resolution, I would love to screenshot it and use it as a backdrop.
I mean, the up-res version that you found is actually decent.
Yeah, I tried. It's still very VHS.
It does not age well.
Yeah,
it'll look good on Instagram when it's shrunk down.
Oh yeah, it can shrink down, but like trying to put it on like my display, which is what like 3,000, 4,000 something, whatever. It looks like 3 pixels and like a giant peach head.
So yeah, that is the episode. Other stuff that we did not talk about. This was collected as a graphic novel that was called the X-Men Animation Special. They basically redid the comic in the style of the cartoon. It was based off of a 2-issue story in the X-Men comics, and I forgot to write down which ones.
It makes sense though, because there's so much story happening in it, and like knowing that Larry Houston had something to do with it makes so much sense, because it wasn't a throw, besides a couple things like, Emma Frost having like a lightning beam or whatever. Like,
yes. Which I'm still offended by. By the way, it was Uncanny X-Men 129 to 139, influenced by those, yeah.
But everything, to me, even though I didn't read comics a lot growing up, the few times I did, like this pilot felt like comic book pages coming to life.
Yeah.
Less of an adaptation and more of like just even the way that they're drawn, Like everyone, no matter what age they are, like kind of roughly looks like a really cut middle-aged person. Xavier's supposed to be older. He still has chiseled like cheekbones and jawline and stuff. And Kitty looks like she's only a couple of years younger than him.
It was the end of that 60s to 80s comic book aesthetic that would later get reinvented because of stuff like Watchmen and Dark Knight Rises and stuff like that. This was the end of that era.
And I also appreciate, like, I don't know how much money that got put into this pilot, but like
the equivalent of RoboCop's 13th episode,
whatever that was, because we talk about like all the corners they had to cut for 92, even though we still loved it. But then like in this, there's like small details that like no one would notice except maybe the animators and stuff. Like when they go to rescue that family that Pyro and Blob had captured. Like I remember specifically like Dazzler kind of towards the front of the line of the X-Men and stuff, and like the flames like reflecting off her face. Like someone animated that.
I mean,
the spatial awareness of lighting and stuff.
Toei is a great animation studio, and that was one of the things. Like we know Saban is known for being on the cheap side with their animation, but Toei was like kind of the gold standard. Even if the show didn't work for whatever reason, it still always looked good. Mm-hmm. So,
and I think you mentioned this earlier, but like so much story happened in this that it could have been easily 2 or 3 parts in another animated series. But like I was almost like whiplashed rewatching this today. I remember all this stuff happening, but for whatever reason, I know it was only like a 20-30 minute like pilot. But in my head, it was like an hour's worth of events.
It felt like a movie because of the amount of shit. Yeah.
But yeah, I just kept like whiplashing from one thing to the next. I was like, man, this almost happened in real time in 22 minutes. Like,
and I think a part of that may have just been like, that's what cartoons were when you were an advertisement for a toy brand, is you literally were like, nobody has an attention span. Just go, 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 go the entire time. Yeah.
And I guess like Larry and Rick and all them, you know, they probably, since this was a pilot, they didn't know if they were going to get into those shots. They needed to fit as much as they could into this.
Well, like I said, that a part of that came from the toy executive production aspects of it. The other part was the original story was supposed to be around the Sentinels, which made its influence into the video game, because if you play that game, the majority of the fights that are non-boss fights, I'd say 80% of that game are Sentinels that you're fighting.
Yeah, of like different colors.
Right,
like
because they have multiples. Different. Yeah, it was the this color is this power, that color is the other power, etc. But yeah, like it was because they wanted to be crystal clear, no shades of gray. These are the good guys and these are the bad guys.
Yeah.
So
I know. I aside from this theme song being kind of cheesy, like I rewatched this happily twice today.
Yeah.
And I might watch it again. It's just like such a fun, even with all the stuff that maybe logistically doesn't make sense or whatever, the way it presented itself in the time period this came out, logic didn't need to play part in anything. Cyclops can shoot through his astronaut helmet. Like there's a dragon cat thing on an asteroid, you know, like
I love Magneto, the dragon cat. Yeah.
Is just a bad guy, just like Megatron. There's not a shred of good in him, you know, like it's just Toad is.
And then he yelled at Megatron.
Really?
Frank Welker.
Oh, yeah. So funny. And is everybody like that's the same crew, like for everyone from the composers and stuff worked on like Gem and G.I. Joe and
and I mean when I was reading off the voice actors, I picked their most iconic role that stood out to me. But like half of those people at least had like a part on Transformers or a part on He-Man. It was like that, or G.I. Joe. You know, it just couldn't list through because it was like
a lot.
Most of them fell into like a who's who category. I would say it was like 80% of that voice cast were people you have heard or seen somewhere else, and you would instantly know who the character was.
And they created characters. They didn't like Chris Pratt it, you know, where they were just like them with a cartoon face. Like it.
Like, would you have ever guessed that it was Megatron at all?
Yeah,
when I told you that that's Toad's voice actor.
And even Kitty, like, she sounds normal, but when you really listen to her, they made like that voice actor made like choices.
Yeah,
and it doesn't quite sound real, but in a good way. Just over reality, just enough to be like a cartoon character, but not like super campy.
Yeah.
Everyone, even like Nightcrawler, it's they made it so that you could close your eyes and know what's happening and who's talking. It was so good. Even Storm, man, like Storm's voice was different, but the right energy.
Yep.
I don't know. Is this a cool? I would, even though I wouldn't sacrifice anything for X-Men 92. I still kind of want to peek into the multiverse. That
what would it have been
a little bit to see how much further we got. You know, we got down the road with like Dazzler and stuff.
That's actually the one for me that it's like, God, I wish we got to see more of Dazzler, because like, you know, aside from obviously like I love the recent stuff with Dazzler with X-Terminators and stuff, but like she's also reinvented herself with every pop era. Like we've talked about this. Like the original Dazzler was a disco queen, and then you had this like 80s version of Dazzler, and then the 2000s version of Dazzler is like a grunge punk version of her. I just kind of always have loved that character, so it sucks that she gets like the moment in time that's so short-lived to be a part of the team.
And they don't ever address her music in this pilot. They don't get to it.
I mean, you don't even know she has anything to do with music in this one, aside from just she uses sound to make her, her finger guns.
Yeah.
Which I do love the finger guns.
But I'm glad you finally got to see the genesis of all the X-Men shows.
I mean, I genuinely enjoyed it. I think it very much lives in a moment in time, and I say that because I am somebody who doesn't have the nostalgia of the VHS and stuff like that the same way you do. It wasn't bad, but I also see hindsight being what it is. I get why Margaret Lesh swapped over to what would become 92. Because I don't think it would have the longevity the same way. Like, I'm sorry I've hammered this point home, but like rewatching the original He-Man, rewatching the original Ninja Turtles, rewatching an episode of G.I. Joe, it doesn't hit the same, 30 years later, 35 years later.
Yeah, I think this would have fallen very much in like the G.I. Joe category. It seemed like the direction they were going with stuff. Ninja Turtles is an interesting one because I recently started rewatching some of those because they have actually on their YouTube channel started posting the original episodes in full. And it's entertaining for me to watch now, not because it's necessarily like aged well in the same sense that like Batman or X-Men 92 did. This is not a Ninja Turtles podcast, but if anybody wants to talk about it sometime, I rewatched that first Ninja Turtles episode. It is wild. They're like,
I think the first episode does age decently. I think the follow-ups do not, though.
I can get that, but like that first episode was so wild because they were like, "There's been a rash of crime around town. We don't see any guns, so they must be Asians because Asians know how to use swords." I was like, "This is wild, man."
I didn't remember that was a thing, so now I have to watch it just to send you text messages later.
The cops were like, "Only ninjas could do this because there's no firearms involved."
And I'm just gonna put this out here for those of you who may be finding this for the first time ever. Rod is of Asian heritage, so this just to be crystal clear.
But that's why I thought it was funny because I remember watching this as a kid, thinking this is really cool, and then now I'm like 41. I'm watching like this is cartoon logic.
Christ.
I personally don't even really take it as like offensive. It's just a funny jump in cartoon logic of like, and that's the conflict of they're like, well, it's clearly these Ninja Turtles, right? Because it's like, okay, it's so random. It's so wild.
If it was guns, it would have been the Italians, so I get it.
Yeah. Which is funny because then they're like pizza, so it's like it's Japanese Italians? Like, I don't know.
Like I said, if it was guns, it would have been crystal clear Italians.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, like I said, I'm genuinely happy we got to do this. I love that this episode is essentially airing on the 2-year anniversary of our first post as well.
Oh,
so it feels awesome. Yeah, because remember we recorded originally like over Christmas break and the first year, and this is the first one of 2024. So kind of it's a cool full circle, and it's been really cool, and I think we got a lot out of that at LA Comic-Con. Like one of the things we didn't talk about on the last episode is when we were talking to the Leewalds, we were at their booth having a genuine conversation with them for like 20 minutes.
For a while, yeah.
And then some people came by and they were like, before we were able to shoot our real short with them. But yeah, we legit had a 20-minute conversation with them about the show. And it's like, I don't know if that ever would have happened to the level that it became if we didn't end up doing this dumb fucking podcast.
Yeah, no, seriously. Even with the relationship I have with Ron doing the music for the show and stuff, I never put in my head that I would like sit down and talk with the Leewalds about the show and stuff, just because I wasn't thinking that it would come to that point or whatever. But yeah, there we were. Like, we had them on the show, now when you're listening to this last series. Yeah, last series. And then got to talk to him at Comic-Con. You got to meet him a couple times before that at other Comic-Cons and stuff. I also survived a Comic-Con, so that was...
Yes, I am very proud of you.
Yeah, no, it's been a fun show.
By the way, other people I saw that weekend definitely got corona.
Oh, really?
Yes. I'll tell you who after.
I don't know if it's just... I think it's just the culmination of things I do. I don't know if it's any one thing. You know, I keep up on my vaxes. I
constantly smoke weed.
That too. Mask up, kind of like a calculated risk. You know, so like most of Comic-Con, not really, but like there were some times where like I'm gonna throw this bad boy on and walk through this hall of people coughing on everyone.
Rod,
but happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah. Let's wrap this up, and we will be back with our regularly scheduled content next week with some out of order X-Men Evolution episodes, because we learned there were things in the previous episode that were revealed in other ones that we haven't watched yet. So that's a whole thing.
I was going to say, as of right now, we don't know if the next episode is going to be Evolution or 97. Probably not 97, but who knows?
Yeah. So to make this even better, Rod, the episode that we know we skipped, and I say that with air quotes because we're just going in the Disney order, is 2 episodes away for us. So it's not even next week's episode, it's the following week's episode too.
Right. All right, well, stay tuned for whatever is about to happen.
We fuck it all up, don't we?
Yeah, it's a specialty. It's why you listen.
And thank you guys for joining us. If you have any thoughts, make sure to drop them into the comments of either the YouTube upload or the official Instagram post of this episode. Also, I put the survey thing at the ends of Spotify episodes so people can leave comments there too. Also, Spotify, make it so I could just put an indeterminate amount of time and not have to click on the calendar every time for that to go for a full year. And also, I can't type it in. I have to do the dumb thing where I click day 1 and then I have to hit fucking 12 times to the end of the year to click the end date of it. I'm really angry at Spotify right now. And if you like what you heard, we appreciate a rating on the podcast app of your choosing. You can catch us on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Castbox. It's been a long night, and hopefully we survive into 2024 when this actually needs to air. So,
I mean, I'm still rooting for Comet 2024. Let's get Scorpio.
Let's get Scorpio.